Hey everybody, Ed Homewood, Old Guy Hi-Fi channel. Hope everyone's doing well today. Today should be a fun review. We're going to take a look at the Magnepan LRS Plus. They're cool speakers. Sit back, relax, and we'll get going on this video. Well, quick addendum to the video. I had the video all done, edited, ready to go, and I was talking to the folks up at Magnepan, and I found out they've changed the way they're going to market with the LRS. So now the LRS, it used to be $1,000 direct from them, but you paid shipping. I'm sure they've had a little bit of, inflation and everything else. There's probably a little bit of a cost increase on their end just to build the stuff, I can imagine. They haven't changed the price on it in years. So what they've done is they've now made, the panels are now $1,295 direct only from Magnepan. But that price includes free shipping. Now remember, shipping on things like this, it's the dimension of the box, not the weight of the box. So the box on this is greater than the 48 inches it's tall, greater than the 13 inches it is wide, and probably about 6-7 inches deep because you got to accommodate both panels in a box. So it actually is, I think once you figure in the freight at $1,295, it's really kind of an offset. I think it's still a great deal. Even if they were $1,500, these things would be an absolute steal. So again, just to be clear, the Magnepan LRS Plus is now available only from Magnepan directly on their website. It is $1,295, and that is shipped free anywhere in the contiguous 48 states. If you're outside that area, contact Magnepan and they can fill in, give you the information, whatever, and help facilitate your purchase of it. So again, I just wanted to make sure you guys knew that before you watch the rest of the video. So what is the Magnepan LRS Plus? Well, it is a $995 pair of two-way quasi-ribbon floor standing speakers. Their frequency response is rated from 50 Hertz to 20,000. They are 86 dB at 500 Hertz with a 2.83 volt input sensitive. 2.83 volts is about the equivalent of 1 watt RMS. They're rated at nominal impedance of 4 ohm, and remember, this is a more resistive load than it is like a conventional speaker being more of a reactive load. They're 48 inches tall, 13 inches wide. They're only an inch deep. They're really interesting, and I'll put in some pictures of it, the units themselves, because I have the optional stands, which I think are well worth the expenditure to do, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But anyway, Magnepan has been around since 1969. They're up in Minnesota, and they've been known since the beginning of time for their planar magnetic speakers and have enjoyed an amazing reputation in the audiophile community literally for decades. So many of my friends and audiophiles and people that I've known in the industry for years have always held Magnepan in very high regard. They've owned them, they've used them, they demo with them, whatever. It is a really remarkable product, and it's very unique and a little bit different, and it's not your conventional speaker. And you know what? We're going to talk about that. Well, before we get too far along, I wanted to show you the connection panel on the back of the Magnepans, and you'll see there's a fuse here for its protection. There's your speaker binding post. You can actually take bare wire and tighten these set screws down on it, or it'll take banana plugs. This is for tweeter adjustment. You pull that jumper and the speakers come with a 1 ohm or a 2 ohm resistor you can put in there to tailor the high frequencies to match your particular taste. I found it sounded best with the jumper in place. You'll also notice, kind of seeing through the cloth here, some of the crossover components. The other thing I wanted to show you is I have the large optional stands on these rather than the standard ones that come out of the box. These are well worth considering. You'll see I do have isoacoustics on it, and I use these little carpet runners to help move these things around much easier, and they're still completely isolated. So again, I recommend the heavier duty stands, very much well worth it. Anyway, so that's the back side of the LRS Plus. So this section of the video is completely different, shot on a different day, different lighting, different arrangements, so forth. I was really unhappy with the way I was describing the quasi-ribbon technology that the LRS Plus has used, so I had to refilm it, and I apologize. It's going to seem a little bit disjointed, I think, once I get it edited, but I wanted to make sure I was giving all of you the right information and a better understanding, maybe a clearer understanding of the technology that Magnepan uses in this. So a quasi-ribbon loudspeaker like the LRS uses a kind of a unique type of planar magnetic transducer. Now, it shares many principles with a true ribbon transducer and or a planar magnetic. And remember, all the bigger model of Magnepan are planar magnetic speakers. It's designed in a way that it makes it much more easy to build, hence the fact that they can offer this at a really low price. So it's much more practical to build, but it still gives you the benefits of a ribbon-like transducer. Now, a quasi-ribbon loudspeaker is comprised of 3, maybe 4 different components, and we'll talk about the 4th one in just a second. So the first component is the diaphragm itself, and it's a thin sheet of mylar, which I think is a polyester film, super thin. And to that sheet is applied super thin aluminum strips. Think of aluminum foil, but maybe even thinner, in thin strips. So you can kind of get an idea. There's magnets and foil strips visible here, but it gives you an idea of the structure of it and how it's done in a linear fashion. So those aluminum strips are applied to the mylar, and that is what creates, as you apply electrical current, the sound from your amplifier, the current from your amplifier, AC, 20 to 20,000 hertz, is applied to those aluminum foil strips. That's what creates the current that can allow that diaphragm to move within a magnetic field. It's called a Lorentz force. So the entire surface of the diaphragm radiates sound. So it's very even, it's very low distortion. It's kind of fast, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So that's what the quasi-ribbon part of it is, ribbon conductors. Now, the diaphragm lives within a fixed static magnetic field, right? And then again, you'll see strips of magnets. So as you apply current to those foil conductors, that's what causes the plus or minus, the polarity reversing in the magnetic field to cause the diaphragm to move back and forth. So a speaker does a similar thing. It has a speaker is just a linear electric motor rather than one that rotates like like we're used to in our blenders and things like that. This is a little bit different, kind of the similar principle. It is sort of an electric motor, and I'll talk about the differences in conventional speaker versus this in just a second. So that magnetic field is what the diaphragm, the conductors in the diaphragm, operate within to create sound backward and forward. So the panel itself is just designed to hold everything in place, keep the mylar stretched accurately tight, and then they use these little things called buttons, and they're on the surface, and I think I got a picture of them here. And they're placed in strategic locations to kind of tune the resonance of the panel. Here's a way to think of it. Take like a dry cleaning bag, stretch it over a wooden frame, right? Where it connects to the frame along the edges, it's going to be much tighter there. In the center, that's where the greatest amount of motion is going to be, and the most amount of uncontrollable motion. So what the buttons do is the engineers at Magnepan place these in specific locations to kind of tune the panel to eliminate those unwanted resonances. And again, this is called a quasi two-way. So the buttons help kind of divide up the panel to do high frequencies, mid frequencies, low frequencies, and get that full range sound coming out of it. And we'll talk about that in just a second on bass response. So unlike a conventional speaker, I'm going to put in some cutaway drawings of all this kind of stuff. So we all know what a cone speaker looks like. A cone speaker itself has a cone, and it's either pulp paper, it might be polypropylene, it could be a metallic cone, it could be a sandwich material, a combination of polypropylene and metal or whatever. There's all kinds of hybrid materials that are used in cones. That has mass, right? Now that cone has to be driven in and out pistonically. So under the dust cover part of it, there is a tube. It can be aluminum capped on, sometimes even on cheap speakers it was kind of a paper or cardboard material like a cardstock. And that's called a voice coil former. Now around the former are wire wound around it to create a coil. That's the electric motor part. Now that coil and that former live in a magnet. There's a pole piece in the magnet structure around it. And as you apply current to that voice coil, the polarity of it causes the cone to move in and out. Well, you've got the mass of the cone, you got the mass of the dust cover, you got the mass of the coil former, you got the mass of the coil itself. In addition to that, to keep the speaker from jumping out of the frame, there's what's called a spider, and it's a very rigid, doped, treated cloth material. It's got ridges, it's ribbed, and that's what holds the speaker in check. It's kind of like the suspension of a car. It keeps it from going too far, and once it moves, it tries to pull it back. Now, on the outer edge of the cone is a surround, and it could be a rubber surround, it could be an inverted surround, it can be a dome surround, it can be a pleated surround, it can be expanded foam. There's a a zillion different materials people use for surrounds. But if you think about it, we've got a cone with mass, a coil with mass, a former with mass. We've got a spider that's trying to resist the cone motion. We've got a surround on the outer edge of the cone to try to resist or keep the cone's motion in check. Now, put all of that in a sealed box where you've got a fixed amount of air. Think of all the mechanical resistance that cone has to work against to create sound. As it pushes in, the air in the box wants to push it forward. As it pushes out, the air in the box wants to pull it back. The spider wants to pull it back. The surround wants to pull it back. All of those actions slow down the motion of the cone. This has none of those issues. This is much faster because it is much lower mass. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of kind of the differences. Now, I'm not saying cone speakers can't sound good. They obviously sound great. And they can be absolutely high performance. So that's not an issue. This is just a different way to do it, but with a much larger radiator. It doesn't require a zillion cones. It doesn't require really any crossovers, although there is some crossover network in it. And I'm not exactly sure. I think it is probably for low end, and or it may apply to different portions of the foil tracings on the Mylar film. But we're not handing off from one driver to another. We're just handing off maybe the workload on a different part of the surface area of the diaphragm. So it's much faster. The transients are better. Now, there are some differences, in dynamics and everything else, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the next thing I want to kind of explore is the difference between this quasi-ribbon and maybe an electrostatic speaker, which some people are familiar with. So the LRS and electrostatic speakers share some similarities, and they share some differences as well. Both are flat panel transducers, and both have some, very different kind of methods of compressing and rarefying the air. I talked about the LRS and its quasi-ribbon. An electrostatic is different in that the diaphragm in electrostatic actually has copper coil across it, and it is the stators, where the magnets are in an LRS, these are electric stators. So current is applied to the front stator positive, back stator negative, and it is the stators that set up the oscillating or the alternating current that causes the diaphragm to move. So the diaphragm basically acts like a magnet, and then the stators are causing that diaphragm to move. The problem with that, well, there are some good things about it, there are some bad things about it. So the LRS, from a clarity standpoint, both are excellent. If you were to really split hairs, and again, we're talking about a $1,000 speaker versus several thousands of dollars speakers for, let's say, a quad ESL. The clarity on both is excellent. Maybe the ESL would have a slightly clearer sound. It'd be really hard, and you have to be super careful about equipment matching. Less so with this, a little bit, but less so with this. Both present an absolutely immersive and really satisfying soundstage. So there's really not much difference there. They're both super holographic. Put tubes on either one and you've got an amazing soundstage. Now, bass response, an electrostatic speaker does very poorly on bass response because you can't move that diaphragm too far. The LRS does a better job. Again, these buttons help keep the diaphragm in check. It is limited on its low end down to 50 hertz, but it's pretty accurate. The way I would describe the bass response on this is think of a appropriately priced, maybe $800 to $1,500 sealed box 6-inch two-way stand mount speaker. This has equivalent bass. The nice thing about it, though, is it doesn't have to hand off from one to the other, from a midwoofer to a tweeter. That makes a big difference as far as cohesiveness of sound. Now, an electrostatic, they can't move a lot of air. The diaphragms are very sensitive. They're very fragile. I'll talk about it in just a second. But they can, now an electrostatic can do really well with mid-range and tweeter. So if you think of a Magnepan, not a Magnepan, a Martin Logan, apologize to the guys at Martin Logan. Martin Logan uses an electrostatic panel, curved one, to do mids and highs, and it does a great job at that. But for bass, they put in either a passive bass module underneath or an active bass module underneath, and that's a really good, satisfying, and really high performance solution. But you're talking about several thousands of dollars more than these. Dynamics, I think these do a little better on dynamics than a electrostatic speaker can. Again, you can't move that diaphragm too far, and I'll talk about the reason why. Now, this is not quite as dynamic as a traditional box speaker, and it's just, again, how much motion that diaphragm can move within the magnetic field. A cone can move a greater amount, but this is, again, this entire surface radiates, so it gets very comparable maybe ultimately not as dynamic, although I never felt like I was missing anything. I think that's probably, I'm splitting hairs on that a little bit. As far as efficiency, these aren't super efficient. They do require a good, strong amplifier. It is a 4 ohm load. It is more resistive than it is reactive. Like a conventional cone speaker is more of a reactive load. This is more resistive. Magnepan recommends a good, stout amplifier with good current. I will tell you, I ran these off a lot of tube amps, and I know dozens of people that have Magnepans, and they use tube amps on them, and they love that sound. So I would be, you don't want to, here's the deal. You don't want to use an inexpensive Fun-Fi amp on these. You want a good quality amplifier, and I'll talk about that in the testing, how I did. But again, you know, a $500 SMSL GAN-fed amp is not the right amp to use on these, believe me. And I talk about that in kind of the testing and the description, summary part of it. Now, as far as impedance, it is a 4 ohm impedance, and as I said, it's more reactive. ESLs are very high impedance, and it can be very variable. So again, you need a proper amplifier for it. That's why tubes do well with electrostatics, because tubes like higher impedance, although they do really well with this. Now, here's the thing, durability-wise, these are much more reliable and much more robust than any electrostatic speaker. Electrostatic speaker, the diaphragms can age. Now remember, Quad's been making electrostatics since the 50s. I guarantee all those diaphragms have gotten old and rigid and brittle. And a lot of times if you overdrive an electrostatic speaker, I remember back in the day, buddies who had them, you know, we'd be listening kind of late at night and, you know, put on something a little bit dynamic with some bass, and you'd kind of see these look like little static discharges across the surface of the stator. And that's actually shorting. That's where the diaphragm's actually hitting the stator. You can burn a hole in the diaphragm on an electrostatic speaker, but they need maintenance and they need replacing, absolutely. That's why you'll find people, go online, you'll look, there's probably a dozen guys in the US that will rebuild diaphragms for quad ESL speakers. So these are much more robust. These need space near the rear wall as far as placement. They can be a little closer to the sidewall. Electrostatics, they can be large. They're super sensitive to room placement. You need to be aware of that. So I think the difference between this and a comparable electrostatic is this costs way less money. This, I think, can offer as highly detailed and as open a sound with far fewer maintenance concerns. I think it offers even greater transparency than an electrostatic would. It is really, you know, this will give you a taste of the super high resolution panel speaker for not a lot of money, and I think that's really important. So now, again, as I said, I'm doing this kind of after I already shot some other sections of the video, so hopefully I can edit this in smoothly, but I doubt it. So if it jumps around, I apologize, but I wanted to give you a better description of this. So thanks for putting up with that, and we'll get on with the rest of the video. So in my room, this wall you see behind me is actually, it's just a drywall, framed drywall, but behind it, about 4 feet behind it, is a full-blown concrete wall. And I pulled that out so I can get behind these racks and get to all the wiring. That's why you don't see a lot of wires in my system. So I had them about 4 feet out from that wall, and I sit about 10 feet or so from kind of the center point between the two speakers. I have some, and you probably saw it in the B-roll, I have some blue painter's tape on the floor, which are kind of the sweet spot. Almost all speakers work pretty well in and around that area. A little bit of fidgeting here, but that's my starting point, and it seems to be pretty reliable. So I started with them there. So I'm about 10 feet away. I had them probably 11 feet apart, and as far as toe in, I had them towed in so that they were kind of aimed, you know, the left speaker was aimed just over my left shoulder, and my right speaker just over the right shoulder, just outside the shoulder area, not beamed in. And I'll tell you what, the sweet spot was fine. I could move my head. You know, it's the old thing, well, you can't move your head an inch or the whole soundstage collapses. That never happened with me. The soundstage was beautiful. And actually, if you sat off axis, you could still hear both speakers. Yes, the soundstage wouldn't be as well defined as if you were in that kind of middle, I don't know, probably, I would guess probably easily a 3 foot, you know, 1 meter range you could have your head in, and the stage was still really rewarding. So the head in the vise thing is nonsense. You don't need to worry about that. As far as equipment I use to test it, anybody who's watched my channel for a while knows that I have some fairly regular equipment I use as references because I know the sound of that gear really, really well. So I did, the first test with this was obviously with the Advanced Pairs A12 Classic. Now that's a $4,000 integrated amplifier. It is fully solid state, but it does have a tube buffer, and that makes a difference. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. That was a beautiful combination. I'm not sure it's a price appropriate combination, but that was a beautiful combination. When I brought these home from Axpona, I also brought home a Vincent SV500 MK tube preamp solid state, or Class AB solid state amplifier output integrated. So tube on the front end, solid state Class AB on the back end at 50 watts. Had no trouble with these, and that was a great combination. And there's going to be a theme here with tubes. That was a really good combination. It's much more price appropriate at about $2,000 or so, I think, for that amplifier. I did try it with the Cambridge Audio EXA 100. Again, that's in and around that $2,000, $2,200 price point. That's a big, full-blown, ballsy, solid state, 100 watts a channel, but I think that's underrated. That was a good combination, but maybe just in the mid-range area, that pure solid state with these speakers, right? The Cambridge is a great piece, but in this combination, there was maybe a little bit of extra energy in the mid-range. It wasn't unsatisfying, but you know me, I'm the smooth, warm guy. So it was good. They had no trouble driving it, and it sounded crisp and clean and imaged beautifully, but just a little bit extra energy in the mid-range, at least for me. Then I tried it with the Black Ice F22. That's a full tube amplifier. That was a beautiful combination, and that has the Jim Fosgate Odyssey circuit in it. So really, basically, as far as damping and control of the speaker, it's very much like a solid state. That was a good combination with these, very good combination. The F22 doesn't have that quote-unquote classic tube sound. It's a very clean, warmish, but very detailed, very fast, it almost sounds solid state, but it isn't. I mean, it's just a really unique amplifier. I also used the Unison Research S6 Black Edition, which is a full Class A ultra linear configuration tube amplifier, and that was a good combination. That's 40 watts. That did good. That had enough damping. It maybe got a little lazy in the bass, but I don't know why. That amplifier sounded wonderful on all other conventional speakers, and it sounded great on these, but it wouldn't have been my first choice, and it's $7,000. It's not particularly price appropriate for this. Then I have a Rogue RP5 tube preamp, and the boys at Black Ice built me an F360 preamplifier that uses a 1969 GE 6NS7 tube in it, and they sent me a bunch of other tubes to play with. And I took those two preamplifiers and I paired them with, I have a bunch of Class D amplifiers in right now. So the first Class D pairing I did was the Evo 150. Worked great, sounded wonderful. That's a Hypex Encore Class D amplifier, but I think Cambridge, that preamp section, that full-blown Class A preamp section of the Evo 150 is magic, and that was a very magic combination. Again, not necessarily price appropriate at $3,200 and these at $1,000, but it drove them no problem, and I'm sure the Evo would drive any of the Magnepans without any trouble. But then I tried, and that was the amp that got me to really give Class D a chance. I did use the F360 with the Live Audio GAN M mono blocks. I used it with the Orchard Audio, and I don't remember the model number, but it's got a 25 in it. Kind of a smaller GAN FET mono blocks. And I used it with the RG Pure, which is the bigger module, more powerful module, GAN FET module with all silver wiring inside. And with the F360, it was a very good combination. With the RP5, which has got more tubes in it, a much more tubey sounding preamp, that was really, really good. The GAN FET Class D amps on these with a solid state front end, it's a little too energetic. I found it to be a little bit too energetic. So I would, if you like that sound and you like hyper detail, it's a great combination, and these will do it, and they'll work with those amps, no problem. It just was a little too much energy for me in the kind of upper mid-range area. Then I was very fortunate in that, you guys know Harley Lovegrove from Pearl Acoustics. His partner AJ is a genius amp designer, and AJ designed an amp that they showed at Axpona called the 7040, and it is a dual mono amplifier using Bruno Puzzi's latest Purify Class D modules, and then AJ puts his front end on it with, oh my God, there's some secret sauce in that amplifier. That and either the F360 or the RP5 was magic. It could be one of the best combination of preamp and amp I've heard, regardless of speakers. Just amazing. You'll see the reviews of that soon. That was a magic combination. But again, it's $7,000 for the amp and $3,500 for the preamp. I'm not sure that's a price appropriate combination, but I wanted to give these things a real good test. So I found that honestly, the Vincent, at price appropriate wise, the Vincent was a really, really good combination. I did for a little while run them off the Cambridge AXR 100 and it drove them okay. Got a little warm, but it sounded really good. And again, it's $700 for that amp. Yeah, that might work, but I think I would rather do something like the Vincent or a Rogue Sphinx, tube front end, Class D back end. That would be a good combination. Again, more price appropriate for these. So those were kind of the amplifiers I used. Everything was fed from Artavana. Everything was fed through a variety of different DACs. The live DACs that I have. One that I use that you'll see a review of, and it's back up here. It's called the SMSL. Excuse me, not the SMSL. It is the Shanling SMT 1.3 streamer DAC. Ooh, that's a good piece. I think it smokes almost any other streamer out there. So anyway, we'll talk about that when I do the review of it. So that's the gear I used. Now, let me take a minute or two or five to talk about the music I used. Well, because these speakers image so marvelously, and I'll get deeper into that in a little bit, I wanted to use a recording that I thought really had some interesting image to it. So you can kind of maybe hear what it's like on your system, and then I'll kind of describe how it sounded on this. It's this recording from the Amsterdam Loeki Stardust Quartet called La Spagna from 1996. Now, the Amsterdam Loeki Quartet they all play recorders. Now, many of us remember recorders from elementary school or music classes and things like that, but recorder was a huge instrument in the Baroque period and in the Renaissance period. And this is actually Renaissance music from the Spanish royal court during that Renaissance period. And so there's composers like Antonio de Cabezon, Diego Ortiz, Tomás Luis de Victoria, some really interesting, really cool, and it's all done for recorder. Now, they're all short pieces, but the recorder, you go from a little tiny high-pitched one to these giant recorders that sound almost like contrabassoons. So they're very deep and rich and whatever. But the way it was recorded, it was done in 1993 at St. George's Hall in Bristol, England. And obviously it's a quartet, so they're all kind of in a semicircle, probably around a stereo arrangement of microphones. But the room itself is very live. It's very reverberant, and you get this huge sense of room and this beautiful kind of the sounds of the recorders kind of moving around off the walls. And oh my goodness, it's just a wonderful recording to listen to. And I know it sounds like recorder music. You got to be kidding me, Homewood. No, I'm serious. This is a really good recording. It's really interesting music. It's really kind of a snapshot of a period in time in a place in Renaissance Europe in the Spanish court that is just interesting. There's these kind of really, I don't know, there's a lot of interpretation that goes on here with this kind of back and forth, this point and counterpoint. There's some really interesting kind of nuances in the way the music was written in that period and the way it was orchestrated in that period. It really kind of demonstrates that the recorder is a far more fascinating instrument than we would ever have thought initially without being familiar with it. And again, the ability to have this huge, basically a bass recorder, it sounds so cool. It is really interesting. The recording is very reverberant, very live. They're very good. It is beautifully recorded. And that St. George's Hall, just the sound of that room on these, I felt like I was kind of in that room at the same time. It threw a huge, very detailed soundstage. And that really is interesting. So maybe try it on your speakers. And if it doesn't do it, you got to get a pair of these, maybe. So anyway, what did I use next? Well, you guys know I have a thing for female vocalists, and so I decided to use this recording from Madeleine Peyroux called Blue Room. Now, Madeleine Peyroux, many of you should be familiar with her, but she's an American jazz singer. She was born in Athens, Georgia. She spent her childhood in New York and California, and her family moved to Paris when she was 12 years old. And she was really drawn to kind of the street music, the buskers on the street in Paris, and she wound up busking herself and wound up as a teenager joining a band band called the Lost Wandering Blues and Jazz Band, and that's, kind of where she cut her teeth and got her kind of musical and performance sensibilities from. Her 2004 album called Careless Love was the one that launched her into the forefront, into the public eye. It's just an amazing, beautiful album. She has this amazingly distinctive vocal style. Many people have said it's very reminiscent of Billie Holiday, and I kind of hear that. I think she's unique, like Billie Holiday was unique, although they share some similarities. Anyway, this is the Blue Room is actually it's an album that pays homage to Ray Charles' 1962 album, Modern Sounds in Country and Western Music. It's really interesting. On there are 5 songs that are covers of Ray Charles classics off that album, as well as interpretations by other artists like Warren Zevon and Leonard Cohen. She's just got this amazing ability to kind of infuse songs that we know with her own kind of character, her own interpretation, her own style, her own idiom, as it were. Just amazing. It's kind of a jazzy, bluesy. Her voice is beautifully detailed. This is an amazingly good recording as well. Just a wonderful, wonderful. My big standout on it is the Leonard Cohen track, Bird on a Wire. I love that. Many of you may remember it. If you haven't, you should check it out. Jennifer Warren's album, Famous Blue Raincoat, got a really good rendition of that, of Bird on a Wire there. I think this one actually is better, even though Stevie Ray Vaughan doesn't appear on this album like it did on Famous Blue Raincoat. Anyway, so the next album I used was something completely different. So rather than listening to a bunch of recorders and very nice female vocals, I thought I'd get something a little bit more aggressive in here. So I used this recording from Joe Bonamassa called Different Shades of Blue. Now, if you're not familiar with Joe Bonamassa, what rock have you been under? He is a very legendary American blues rock guitarist, singer, songwriter. He was a virtuoso at an early age. I think at 12, he was opening for B.B. King at certain venues and concerts. I mean, he was really a prodigy and just a great guitarist. This album, Different Shades of Blue from 2014, is unique in that all of the compositions on the album he wrote or co-wrote. And I think that's interesting. They're not covers. They're his own music he was involved, intimately in. And there's just some great blending of traditional blues and rock and some soul in this. It is a very, very rewarding listen. His guitar artistry is absolutely excellent. He's got fast hands. He's not Al Di Meola fast, but he's got fast hands. He's really good at it. It's just a bunch of fun. You get your foot will be tapping, you'll be butt dancing in your chair. There's some great tracks on it, like Oh Beautiful or Different Shades of Blue, which is the title track, and it really kind of highlights his really beautiful and very kind of emotive guitar playing and very soulful vocals. He's matured much as a vocalist on this particular one. My favorite one track on this is the track I Gave Up Everything for You Except the Blues. Wonderful stuff. So, what did I think of these speakers? So what did I think of the LRS Plus? I think they're a magnificent speaker. At $1,000, it's an absolute steal. But you do have to be able to accommodate kind of some of their eccentricities. I mean, they do require special placement. Excuse me. They do require, you're going to have to play with it in your room. They don't work in every room. No speaker works in every room. Some work better than others, but these really kind of need a very kind of symmetrical setup. They need to have kind of even room boundaries, front, back, and sides, or excuse me, sides and back more than front, obviously. And so if you can accommodate them and you've got good amplification, these would be a great speaker. So none of these Fun-Fi brands, topping SMSL, any of that kind of stuff, I would not recommend those amplifiers with this at all. Any of the GaN-fed amplifiers, I'm sorry, the SMSL topping stuff, no, it would just be too much energy. I think you would be asking too much of a kind of $700 desktop sort of amp to drive these. Actually, if you wanted to get into it and you wanted to do something, I think, in and around that price range, the Advanced Paris XI75 would be an absolute beautiful choice with these. I think the Cambridge CXA81 Mark II would be a good choice. Going to have a little extra energy in the mid-range, and if you like detail, that's exactly what you'll get. Beautiful detail. Those would be great. I think a Rogue Sphinx, that's a tube front end with a Hypex Encore Class D output stage. That would be a good combination. I thought the Vincent SV500 MK was a great combination. These will scale up. I mean, if you want to run them on big expensive stuff, that would be great. If you were looking at, let's say, Thomas's Galleon TSA 75, that would be a good amplifier, but you're going to have to put it with a good warm sounding, probably tube preamp, and I don't think a Freya with tubes in it would be the right choice. I think something else. And there's some other stuff out there. There's some other tube preamps. I think Rogue makes an entry-level piece. Anyway, that would be a good combination. So I guess what I'm saying is tubes and solid-state output amplifiers in and around this price point would be a great combination. If you want to go bigger, then you really just kind of choose what you want. But again, I think tube front end, solid state back end, GaNFET, Class D, Class AB. Got to be careful with the GaNFET stuff, but Class D and Class AB, yeah, you're going to be fine. These things produce really good bass. They don't dig deep. They have an equivalent bass of a 6-inch sealed box stand mount speaker in and around its same price point. But where they start to really shine is through the mid-range. It is just glorious. And the image they throw is so beautiful. It's very lush. It's very large. Good center image. Good, reasonable depth and reasonable instrument placement. They do a very good job with that. But you get this really holographic soundstage, especially when you put tubes with them. It just becomes lush and beautiful. And, with the Amsterdam Loeki Quartet, the sound of that room, that really just was amazing. Just gorgeous stuff. High frequency is good. Transients, they're not the fastest speaker in the world as far as transients. They do well. They're somewhat limited, but they do well. And the decays, the decay structures on transients or any of the notes is just lasts forever. It's amazing. That's where they really do super well. These shine in the mid-range and in the upper mid-range for sure. Vocals are amazing. Any of the instruments that fall in that, woodwinds, the recorders, brass instruments, all of those sound wonderful. They have the right kind of tone and texture, and brass has the right bite to it and stuff like that. Just beautiful sounding, wonderful. And again, just that holographic, just kind of enveloping sound stage that you get off of these. It's so rewarding. And $1,000, they're an absolute steal. And I think that's been a common thread of anybody who's reviewed them, if I remember correctly. I don't watch other people's reviews very often, but I think at $1,000, if you can accommodate them in your room, you got to look at them. You got to give them a listen. They're just really, really good. I like them a lot. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the Magnepan LRS Plus. Well, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you'd be willing to give me a like and your subscription. I'd like to thank my channel members and my subscribers and my viewers. Thank you guys so much. You've treated me really well, and I appreciate that. There will be a link to Magnepan's website in the pinned comment and in the video description. Magnepan does sell these direct to the consumer. I have no affiliation with them. There will be a channel membership link in the pinned comment and in the video description. There will be Tidal and Qobuz links to the 3 albums I discussed. There are some affiliate links in the video description. You guys understand the drill on that. There's a link to the Community Post playlist. Please check that out. There's some wonderful music there. I've discovered some music I've used in reviews there. Comment, let me know. Could you accommodate something like this? Is something that you're curious about? Is this something you're interested in doing? Let me know in the comments. I'd appreciate that. I think I've covered all the bases. These are wonderful speakers. They're well worth an audition. You got to give them a try if you can accommodate them. And again, that's kind of the special needs portion of this, is the ability to accommodate them in your space. So anyway, that's it. Like, subscribe, comment, follow me on Instagram. My name's Ed Homewood. This is the Old Guy Hi-Fi channel, and as I always tell you guys, it is your duty to yourself to put on some beautiful music. Sit back, relax, just enjoy yourself for the balance of your day. I appreciate your time so much. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful day.